The next definition is butted frame, and a conversation when it comes to hollow metal doors and frames when a client calls and says, I need a door. Okay. Do you need only the door? Do you need frame? What about hinges? Yeah, I need everything. Okay. So the first conversation that you'll have with a client generally sets the pace for, all the conversations with that same client after. But I find that the first question is, okay, are you going to wrap the wall or are you going to butt the frame up to the end of the wall? And the typical response is either they know exactly what they want to do, or the question, but more so the terms that are used, the words that are used are, to someone who doesn't make a living installing doors and frames, are you going to butt? Are you going to wrap? Those don't make a lot of sense. So a butted frame is one of the first turns in the Y intersection. So you need a door and a frame. You need a door frame, lock hinges, door closers, wall stop, things of that nature. Great. So the question is, are you going to wrap the wall or are you going to butt the frame to the end of the wall? And that question very much so pertains to wall construction. So if you have an existing masonry wall, you're probably not going to wrap it because you're probably going to butt the frame to the end of the wall. If you have a partition wall, studs and drywall, you're probably not going to butt that up to the end of the wall. You're probably going to wrap the frame around it. So a butted frame is an instance where you're going to take the frame and you're going to place it against the edge of an existing wall, is what it is. It wouldn't be place the frame against a wall that you're going to build at the same time, even though that is very common. Because a mason, think of a mason that is doing a strip mall and there's going to be 6 doors, 3 doors, 18 doors in the back of a strip mall, whatever it might be. They're going to want to take the frame, set it in place, and then bring the wall to it. But that is a butted sort of installation where the frame is going to abut the end of the wall. So the question that you'll ask your client is, are you wrapping the wall or are you butting the frame to the end of the wall? Thinking in your head, it's really a question about, tell me about your wall that you're attaching it to. Is it existing? If it is, are you going to wrap it? You could, but you're probably going to butt it up. Then the next question becomes is, how will you anchor it? And wrapping versus butting also tells you a lot about the anchor type that the client's going to use, as well as whether or not the wall is existing or new construction. You're not going to use, very uncommonly will you use sleeve anchors or wedge anchors or wood screws in a new construction. You'll use a method of anchoring appropriate for building the wall to the frame. Like the mason wouldn't use sleeve anchors. He wouldn't bring the wall up to the frame and then drill through the frame and into the wall to anchor it that way. They'll use a wire anchor, a T-anchor, or if it's partition construction, they'll use welded in wood stud anchors or loose wood stud anchors or welded in metal stud anchors or what we would call Z anchors. And as the wall is being brought to the frame is in place, shot down or secured down to the subfloor, standing, really won't fall over. You bring the wall up to it, and then through the back of the studs, you'll drill through them and pierce into the anchor that's generally welded in place. Or you'll use wood studs, take the wood stud anchor, bring the ears around, and then screw through the face of the stud. I don't like that method because shooting the drywall in behind all of that doesn't really work well. And when you're doing that sort of construction, having an understanding of the frame type that you'll use for drywall versus masonry is very much a part of the question, wrapping the wall or butting the frame to the wall. If you're going to butt the frame to the wall versus wrapping it, again, it tells you a lot about the wall construction. That leads you to determining what frame type you use. Will it be drywall type frames or will it be masonry type frames? Because there's an inherent difference. And the big one really is masonry frames have dust boxes. Drywall frames don't. So if you're selling a unit to a client that he's going to butt it to the wall and you believe it to be masonry, you're going to want mortar guards or dust boxes over the hinge preps, over the strike preps, over the anything prep, because when the client goes to attach hardware, like rim exit device strikes, like parallel alarm brackets, like surface mounted overhead stops, like gasketing, you'll want to think about how will the client actually get that screwed and attached if they're going to pump mortar into the back of that frame. Very common. And what you'd probably want to think about doing is accommodating for that. Now, you wouldn't create a giant dust box, but you could take 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch very inexpensive sheet insulation and cut that behind there and just put some duct tape back there so the client can actually pierce in with screws, because yikes, that's problematic, drilling into it. So wrap versus butted leads you to what type of wall is it, leads you to what type of frame will you use. So understanding butted frame requires actually a greater understanding of all of the associated components and all of the trickle-down effect that single answer to is it wrapped or is it butted then leads you down. There's many other intersections that you'll have to decide to go left or right at. If it's going to be a butted frame, most likely it's going to be an existing masonry wall, and butted just means the frame is going to make contact with the end of the wall. Now, sometimes, and most times, the client is going to take that frame, want you to supply it a 1/2 inch smaller because you'll have a 1/4 inch margin on either side and at the header, so the frame will actually slide in. The client can get the frame positioned in this butted application, true plumb level and square. Literally take wedge-shaped wood shims, stick them in there to get the frame absolutely how you want it, this way as well. Making sure nothing's twisted at the bottom, making sure it's all true plumb level and square. True, plumb, level, and square. We're going to get into SDI documents when it comes into troubleshooting doors and frames and checking for, is the frame plumb? Is the frame level? Is the frame square? And is it true? You know, are you getting the same dimension when you measure it from all sides? Getting that frame slid into the opening, marking the holes in the end of the masonry wall, whatever it might be. Probably removing that frame, drilling the holes, because you can't fit a 3/8 carbide bit easily through a frame. You know, maybe you can, maybe that works for you, maybe you want to mark it and then pull it off. Put that frame back in, bolt everything down, remove or snap off your shims. Some people will fill that with backer rod, caulk over it, that sort of thing. Some clients of mine will absolutely always, they'll drill a hole in the top of the jamb, and with a baker's bag, just think of dressing a cake, they'll pump mortar in there. And I have clients that the only way they'll do a door and frame is if it's going to be pumped solid of mortar. Other people, if it was me, I would want the masonry wall toothed out. Frame gets brought in place, that T-anchor is in there, and then you're literally replacing masonry and grouting and filling that. And what happens when a mason is doing a new construction with T-anchors, they'll put that frame in place, true plumb level square, start bringing the wall up, and they're literally backfilling. As they go, they'll backfill, they'll put a T-anchor. Back, as they put a course of block, they backfill, 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 T-anchor, backfill, 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 and they'll fill all of that. What's really super important in butted frame applications, because the anchoring method can very likely involve anchors and concrete that will substantially stress the frame, you've got to make sure that it's true plumb level and square before you start attaching it, and that the same condition exists after the fact. And I have been on job sites where I've seen sheets of plywood, OSB, that are cut, that go in the opening, maybe not the full height, but they'll have them placed in there so they know that they've got their 3/0 dimension. I have customers that will attach the frame only with the door hanging in it. They use the door literally as the shim. I have other people that install the frame, and then they will literally have 2x4s cut, and that all gets put in place as they're going up, and it's left there overnight. In a butted frame application, you have to be mindful about what the concrete could do to the installed frame, especially overnight. There was a condition where in a job, the mason made the decision to install about a dozen frames, and it was in the 50s that day, mid-fall actually, and that night it dropped down to the teens. All of those frames had to get ripped out, and in fact, That year, this was early-ish 90s, that year it stayed sub-zero well into the spring, so that we didn't sell any welded frames for for exterior, because welded frames used in interior applications, that's absolute new construction. Our business was always more remodel or refit sort of, so that's going to be a wrapped installation. A welded frame wasn't sold for 2 months straight, is just the bottom line. And so for butted frame, we describe butted frame by saying what it's not. It's not a wrapped situation. And then laying out all of the other consequences of it being a butted frame. Let's switch to the screen view and let's just take a look there for a moment. If you are enjoying this video, please click thumbs up or like, and also please consider subscribing to our channel. Let's move on to the rest of the video. Okay, so butted frame. A frame which fits against a wall rather than wrap around it. Okay, so what that looks like, here's your wall. It could be anything. It could be 6-inch, it could be 18-inch. And your frame, somewhere, is going to sit like this. You're going to anchor it somehow. Maybe you're going to do this sort of situation with those flatted sleeve anchors. Now the same condition of this butted application, where you're going to place it in the wall, is also of substantial consequence, because it's going to very possibly affect the hardware that you need. Does this door have to go to 180 degrees? If yes, what will you do about the hinge getting it out that far? What about the door closer? Is there going to be some treatment put to the face of the wall that's going to complicate your strike? I've seen drive-it applied to walls like this, and now all of a sudden the latch bolts coming in from the lock on the door, and it's scraping all of this. So where in the depth of the wall its position is of substantial consequence. The degree of opening. Is the latching hardware going to hit anything? Would you possibly need a raised barrel hinge for this application? Or maybe a wide throw? Maybe you have an ADA compliance problem in the sense of you have to have a clear opening, but this masonry wall is only, you can only get a 2'10" in there, a 210 door, because the opening is 38 3/8. Will you achieve clear opening with a door at 90 degree? Would you have to make an accommodation? Would a swing clear hinge be required? Things of that nature. So butting the frame in the sense of where it's positioned here is of great consequence as well. Now wrapped, obviously, a wrapped wall, this is just a partition. That's when you're going to bring your frame over like this. You're going to wrap the wall. You'll have penetration of the wall into the throat of the frame. Back here you don't at all. Pumping this all with mortar is a very common thing. This is supposed to be mortar. Okay. So the summary of all of that is, sure, where that's going to be when it's butted could complicate other things. You have to be mindful of it. Generally you don't have 12-inch thick walls that you're going to bias that towards the inside, but maybe you could. Another thing that will determine the position is what's face brick and what's block. So you may want to avoid face brick and just get into the block only, or whatever the case. It all certainly conspires to give you a series of small little pieces of information that are all independently not very important, but put together as a whole are important to understand. So butted frame is a definition of a frame that fits against a wall rather than wrap around it, and all of the other associated yes-no questions that go along with it. Any questions on this butted frame definition, feel free to reach out. Let's move on to cam lift hinge. Thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed this video, please click thumbs up, please subscribe, and maybe even send the video to someone that you know. Thank you.